Okay, let's talk about folds and wrinkling and aging and not necessarily just aging, but um, the way the skin sags and all this kind of stuff. Because I think we're all guilty of when we look at these characters in games for the most part, what we're dealing with is a heroic character. We're dealing with a person who's not necessarily physically deformed or old or ugly or anything like that. We always tend to deal with very good looking characters. It's not the case in in the grand scheme of things. You're always going to have ugly characters. We should have ugly characters. We should have characters that are a lot more kind of like humanized and that kind of stuff. So what we're going to talk about this is through the lens of aging, because that's the easiest way to show this off. We're going to start looking at the way that skin folds, sags, elasticity goes, kind of features change and all that kind of stuff. Now I've used the word wrinkle and folds a couple of times. What we're not doing are tiny wrinkles. We're not doing anything which doesn't change the silhouette or cast shadows on the face. We are dealing with big information that we can get through our resolutions we're working at the minute. Let's say our highest resolution is 224. So what can we get through that? Now at that resolution, we're not getting anything along the lines of skin pores, skin wrinkles, or anything like that. We're dealing with big folds, like I said. Things that create shadows, things that create highlight. So, what I've got here is my subject. We saw her in a few different videos so far. The biggest thing which dictates a lot of this information, the biggest thing, is the overarching force of gravity. Gravity takes the most toll on our body, and it's the thing that kind of drags everything down. If we didn't have gravity, then we'd have very weird looking faces. But it's gravity. Which way does gravity go? Well, gravity obviously goes downwards, which is what we should always be thinking. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that our features just go directly downwards. Like, our cheeks just don't go directly downwards. Our nose doesn't go directly downwards. Our lips don't go directly downwards. They fall across the face. We have that skull underneath. We have this very rigid form underneath, which is dictating a lot of the shape of our body, a lot of the shape of our head. And we've been talking about it a lot. So what we need to do is remember that the features of the face and all that fall across a skeleton. They fall across. They get pulled down. So what we really should be thinking when we think of gravity is the way it falls across the face. So over here on our left hand side, instead of going downwards, like I said, like this blue line, that's not what we want. Really, our features do this. They get pulled across the surface. And well, like some of these do go directly downwards, but they'll very quickly kind of make deviations like that. This is the direction which everything falls. It falls down, but it follows the face. We should always remember that. If we just start pulling stuff directly downwards, we're going to end up with like very, very fake looking faces. Okay? So we've got to remember that there's a skeleton underneath there. Still, people are not remembering that we have a skeleton. As soon as we get that in our mind, a lot of this work is kind of done for us. But as well as that, it's not necessarily the skin that deforms. You've got your eyes, your nose, and your lips, and your chin, and your jowls, and your cheeks, your ears, the forehead, that all deforms, that all comes down. The biggest offender I always see for people making older people look just very fake are the lips. So currently we've got this character who, let's pace her age at mid-20s. So she's not quite a child, but she's obviously not an old person. She's in kind of the prime of her youth, all that kind of stuff, prime of her life. So let's start attacking this. Well, first of all, we're going to talk about what's going on before we start attacking it in sculpting. There you go. So we spoke about it in class, where we can think about going through the ages of aging. What actually happens? So we have fat deposits in our face. The main ones to think about are like the chin and the cheeks and the jowls. So we've got, if I just draw it as one big shape, it's technically multiple shapes, but if we just think about it as one big shape, we've got this cheek here, which is obviously coming in, and I like to think that it wraps around the top of the nose there and comes down the other side, almost like a bit of a nose bag that wraps around. There's that one. That's one of the first ones to start going. Now what that does is that causes folds or deformity, not deformities, but folds, here along the cheeks around there. Because if we think about it, all this information is held by gravity, and I've talked about it in class. But if you imagine right across that line there, maybe just coming down a little bit like this, that's almost like it's pinned to that part of the flesh there. It's pinned there, right to the cheek. It's pinned. It won't go past that area. It won't travel down. So what it does is as gravity takes hold, what happens, it starts to gather like that, forming, if we think from the sides, this kind of shape. In extreme cases, elasticity goes, we start getting this downward force pulling down, but then it won't, it doesn't go into the cheeks like here. It doesn't go there. Excuse me. Just want to turn this song up a little bit. It's a good song. So, it doesn't go past that point. That's a very good thing to remember. But it will pull the flesh down in some areas. Like here, it will pull the flesh down. Here, obviously, it pulls the flesh down. If down here, it might pull the flesh down. The eye bags, exact same thing happens there. It's not a fat fold, obviously, like we say, it's not a fat deposit. But what we've got is this natural kind of nice skin. So what happens? We start getting those forms pulled down. Now we're going to look at the Daniel Boschung website in a second, but you're going to see it in a couple of those features. We'll look at a young, a middle, and an old. But it's not too hard, This information is not very hard to understand. Around the eyes, we stick around the eyes. This area here is a common one. So what will happen is we'll probably end up losing a bit of mass around the eyes. It'll come to almost like shroud over the corners of the eyes a little bit. And it won't create a sag like that. It'll just pull down. So we won't have that sag. This will just kind of like blend into this sagging flesh anyway. With all this information coming down like there, it often, again, you got to look at your subject for subjects. It's not always everyone has this, but you'll also start to open up almost like a cavity on the inside of the eye. So around here, it might become a little bit more cavernous because, again, if you think about all that flesh being pulled down, all that flesh moving around, it's coming down in this direction and it's coming down in this direction. It's going to start pulling away from that area, creating those cavities. Into the lips, you're going to lose all structure of the lips. Very, very rarely do you see an older person with very, very luscious lips. If they do, they've more likely had work done. But what happens, again, all this information gets pulled under like that, so you thin the lips out. So this is our current lip kind of mass. What might happen is your lips might come like that. We'll lose that mass. Same with the bottom lip. Sometimes the bottom lip kind of curls into the face. Sometimes it becomes a little bit droopier. Again, it depends on your subject. So there's either you're going to lose that mass and it'll kind of become thin like your upper lip, or you'll lose elasticity and you become very like a very droopy bottom lip. Again, look at your subject, see what happens. In the chin, we have a lot of the same things. So we have those fat deposits here. Well, not fat deposits, but you have those, I forgot what they're called, like these shapes here. Again, they might get pulled down, add a bit of mass. Your chin information might pull down a little bit. What happens in the neck, so we'll jump over to the profile view, is all this nice tight flesh around the jaw loosens and drops, as we've been saying. So then what happens is all that nice information that just like blends into the neck, and then you might even get the kind of waddly turkey neck thing going on. Well, no, it's not a might. You will. This kind of information. Now, this is we're jumping forward. Like I said, this is like a 25-year-old female. What we're doing is we're jumping forward like maybe 40 years. We're jumping into the 60s, maybe even the 80s. There might be like a little overhang of skin here. Again, just look. You know, you don't have old people with anime chins. Rarely do you have them anyway. The elasticity goes. You know, you'll like we're talking about all that information here is going to start to create these jowls. You lose that upper lip, becomes thinner. Either that bottom lip will become droopier or become more thinner. Again, depends. Your eyes are going to start to lose. Your ears, I don't know. Your ears are subject. Some ears maintain quite a youthful look. Some ears kind of droop and all that kind of jazz. Your nose might lose its shape. You know, your back of the head might lose its shape. You get your wrinkles on your forehead. You get obviously your wrinkles in your eyes. Now, I'm using the wrong word there. We're talking about wrinkles. That's detailing. We don't want to think about detailing yet. But these are kind of some of the stuff I'm thinking about. I'm thinking of the fat deposits the face that are pulling down. I'm thinking of this loose flesh in the eyes being pulled down. I'm thinking the upper lip mandible lowering down. And outside of modelling, you've also got the texturing side of stuff, which is going to happen. You know, you'll often get burst capillaries, which is the small blood vessels of the cheeks. You'll have more bloodshot eyes. You'll have discolorization. They may be more paler or yellower. There's loads of stuff that can happen. Skin loses its kind of like plumpness and becomes more paper-like, very, very thin. So then you get very, very kind of like pasty-looking skin. And then that's where we can also start thinking about the higher detail of wrinkles, like wrinkles we're talking about. So, with all that being thought about, let's go look at Daniel Boschung and actually see 3 examples of this kind of stuff in action. Young, middle, old. Okay, so then we've got our young subject here, and yes, like I said, there's not really a lot of information here to kind of start to pull out with like wrinkles or folds. There's natural wrinkles. These ones we want to ignore. You know, you could say, oh, she's got some wrinkles in her forehead. You know, she might have the underlip thing. She might have some crow's feet. She's obviously got the epicanthic fold. All this we ignore. So that's how we can look at this and take a few examples. And now I didn't really see a very, very good example for a female face. I'll just have another quick look. Okay, tell a lie. We got this one. It's all the way at the bottom. Now, let's say that first one, mid-20s. Let's say this one is now late 40s, 50s. Okay, so what's actually happening? What can we actually see happening visually? The lighting's a little bit strong in this, but at least on my screen, actually, my display here, actually looks a lot better. On my Cintiq, it looks a little bit blown out, but it's cool. So what can we actually see what's going on here? Well, we can see clearly some kind of loss of kind of elasticity in the eyes here, which is that she's got her eyes raised up, so she's actually pulling up that information. But what's going to happen is this information, this skin is going to be pulling downwards in this direction. What else we got? Well, you can see here we're starting to get those laugh lines appearing, which is that skin coming down and just kind of like creating those droops. Obviously, this isn't a first person. Then they're older. Then they're old. So we've got to extrapolate. But you know, the thins are a bit the lips are a bit thinner. I'm going to make an assumption. I'm going to pretend that she once had fuller lips, not full like giant lips, but fuller lips. Now we're starting to kind of thin out the lips a little bit. Pardon you. We've got some more of that eye kind of information coming in. You know, you can see here that's quite cavernous in that area. So I like thinking that because you've got flesh going in this direction and flesh going in this direction, it's kind of pulling that flesh inwards a little bit. We've got some lovely jowl information here. You can see the shadows kind of forming that jowl information right there. And we're starting to get a little bit of this turkey neck thing going on. You can see some pinching underneath the neck here. Maybe a little bit of something beginning to form in the neck around here. You know, we've got some lines here. Some big wrinkles, but again, we don't need to worry about that too much. But you can start to see that this is starting to, you know, the elasticity is going. Gravity is pulling that stuff downwards. In the eyes, you know, she still's got quite youthful eyes underneath, but, you know, we're starting to get a little bit of that, you know, the elasticity of the under eye, losing elasticity, pulling down. So we're starting to see that happen again. It's still quite flat here, but definitely around here we're starting to see a little bit of that fat starting to drop and create that kind of balcony on the cheek. That's her. So before we jump off to the oldest lady, I have got an example of a male around the same age, I'm going to say. So let's have a look what's going on here. I used him because he is quite cool with what features going on. So again, definitely, if we're in the head here, we've got some major wrinkles, some major furrows, which are, I don't know if that's his, if he said relax and he's already strained his face a little bit, but, we've got some information there, in the eyes especially. So again, you can see how the eyes are starting to hood. You can see how paper-like those eyes are. The skin around the eyes so paper-like. You can see in the epicanthic fold in the corners there, or the corner of the eye. Pardon me. Again, this information is going this direction. If you look at almost like the stretch marks of the skin in around the eyes and the cheeks, you can see in the direction they're going. I'm seeing these wrinkles doing this, which is giving me the idea, well, it's informing me that this is the direction of where everything's falling. His cheeks are awesome. So here we can see that there is definitely, you can see that line. You can see the fat is dropping and then curling around, creating those laugh lines. Again, we've got the same thing happening here. So in the mouth, we've got these wrinkles. Very, very thin lips. So again, and also super asymmetrical for him. But you can see that they're starting to, beautiful jowls. Beautiful jowls. And obviously, we don't have his side profile, but we can very clearly see that he's probably got the good old turkey neck going on. He's got a bit of one of them, I reckon. So that's his chin. And that's his neck, his ear. He's got probably some mass at the back of his neck. He's got that kind of mass going on. Wrinkles, wrinkles, wrinkles. So what happens as well in the cheeks, as that mass of that fat mass gets pulled down, what you also get, and you'll see it in the old woman quite well as well, is it pulls in a little bit into the cheeks. Comes down, pulls in, comes down, pulls in. Because again, almost like we're pulling that flesh down, and the skin gets not sucked in, but it gets taut and it gets kind of pulled in as it tries to adhere to the underlying structure. So some nice stuff there. Again, he's roughly about the same shape as the last lady, but that brings us back to ladies, and to our final one. So this is our old age now. This is where we're really starting to get into the nitty gritty. So we're getting a bit closer. Yeah, look at that. Okay, so nitty-gritty of this, what's happened? Well, you can clearly see a lot of... Again, we're ignoring these wrinkles. We're ignoring all this stuff. What we're doing is we're getting the big wrinkles, the big things that have changed the shape of the face. So you can see here that we've got that drooping skin. We've got that drooping skin that create almost like, if you're imagining it's pulling there and it's pulling there, it's almost like pulling all this flesh on the inside inward, so it gives you this cavity, which then exposes, all that fold there. Same thing happened on this side. Again, she's super asymmetrical face, but we've got that drooping flesh on the side of the eye there. What's really interesting on her that the guy hasn't got and the other girls have got is her corner of the eye there is, I don't know if she's ever had it or if it's due to age, this has become basically one shape. She doesn't have a very obvious opposite, dominant eyelid, which would always be the upper eyelid. Her flesh is kind of almost like meshed together, welded together, membraned together. I don't know how to explain it. We've got some information here, but again, this is very bordering on skin detail. Let's go down to the lower part of the eye. So again, yeah, we've got some beautiful examples of how that flesh wraps and falls down. It goes in and down, so really beautiful structure there in the eyes. Hitting that, again, one of those points where the flesh won't traverse past here in a straight line. It's almost like pinned to underneath the eye here, which then causes it to gather at the bottom, creating these kind of folds. Same things happen in the cheek. So we've got that fat deposit there, comes down, creating that, as it drops, creating those laugh lines either side. Here you can clearly see where the cheek comes in, so I do this in a different colour. This is where, if the fat deposit is coming down. You can see it there, beautiful shape, like that. That's the fat deposit, creating these jowls either side. As that fat deposit gets pulled down, it almost like pulls this section of the cheek in. Pulls that section of the cheek in. That's what gives you them really beautiful vertical wrinkles going down. Again, that lip at the very top. You know, she might have had very luscious lips as a youthful girl, but now with the gravity, it's pulled down. It's creating these overhanging, much thinner lips. She might have had a bigger lower lip at some point. If she's had dentures or anything like that, maybe this is kind of like an impacted jaw kind of thing, or maybe just it was time her lower lip has gone gone back. I myself, I looked at pictures of me when I was a young child, and I had quite big lips as a kid. But obviously, some parts of your body keep growing, some parts of your body don't keep growing. Your body changes and stuff. So maybe I've lost my lips as I got older. She's been losing her lips as she's got older. But there's no kind of like luscious lip balcony thing. It's very, very thin lips. And then you can see there we're going down. We've got a little bit of that chin information going on, and just out of sight we can see very nice, very beautiful waddles, jowls. Again, these images we're not getting all the way around. We're not getting profiles. It's only from the front. So using this information, what I'm not going to do is base an entire sculpt off this woman. But what I'm going to do is use this woman to inform what I'm doing. Especially if I can find someone around the same kind of age, I'm going to look at what's going on here, and then I might find someone who's roughly the same ethnicity, roughly the same age, roughly the same kind of skin condition, or skin condition is in like the condition of the skin, and blend and extrapolate two informations together. If I'm designing or anything like that, if I'm working off a particular character design, I'm going to want to have multiple head angles. If I'm working off an actual person that exists, like a likeness sculpted for celebrity, I'm going to find multiple heads. But if I'm just kind of like sculpting and getting an old person looking, not really, based off anyone, I'm going to find as much of this kind of information as I can. So that's 20 minutes of just chatting on about the human head and wrinkles and skin. Things that govern this information. It's the skull. Number one, it's the skull. Remember that there's always a skull there, and the skull has sections that it will not let go of. So around the head here, our eyelids just don't fall down over our eyes. Our eyebrows just don't fall down. It's almost like they're pinned to that part of the head. They're pinned to that part of the head, but what happens is they droop. These laugh line sections here I keep talking about. This fat here doesn't just come down onto the mouth like that. It might do on some people on extreme cases, but what we're doing is we're looking at these points here where, again, that fat deposit and mass is almost like pinned. It will not go past that section. So what happens is it creates these folds and it drops. Path of least resistance. And then what happens there, then you get these cavities getting kind of chiseled out a little bit. All that's not chiseled, but, stretched out. As it gets to the cheek here, it can only go downwards, so it kind of drops into the neck a little bit, causing these jowls to appear, which are always in the same place. They're always like right there. Look at all photographs and all that kind of. It's all in there. Look at your parents, your grandparents, people on the street, people on the bus, whatever. You'll see this everywhere. All these forms are in the exact same place on everyone. And yeah, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to have all this reference off to the side, but what I'm going to do is spend another 20 minutes, maybe half an hour doing this, just starting to make an old person out of our head. So if I delete all this, so make sure you understand all that.